Hi, everybody. I just realized I was muted. Welcome to another beautiful day on the Coach Mel Show. It is Monday, and I hope you all had a blessed and wonderful weekend. This is the podcast for freedom activists, and I have one such beautiful activist to introduce to you this evening. Please welcome to the stage with me, and then I'm going to introduce her. Let's add Miss Casey Sunshine. Welcome, Casey. How are you?
I am doing really good.
So blessed to have you here. Let me tell you all a little bit about Miss Casey. She's a treasure, and I just met her this last week. We did a podcast together, and I was like, "Oh, I've got to have you on the show. We've got to tell your story. We've got to tell what you're doing in the world because it's absolutely fabulous what you are doing." So, a little bit about Miss Casey Sunshine, pro singer, which I would love to see you sing or hear you sing, I should say. She's a warrior against the pedo cabal. Having survived being molested by 5 different males before the age of 11, she was fondled by the rich and famous in Hollywood while singing professionally with her mother and brother, and was trafficked through several foster homes when school was in session. Ugh. She and her brother were severely abused by Mommy Dearest, but experienced a few years of protection as a mafia goddaughter until she was returned to foster care and raped twice at age 14, prompting her to devote her life to Christ. That's my favorite part. And escaped to her own apartment at age 15. She started therapy at 17, and after years of recovery, has been providing free support uh, to other survivors for the last 29 years. Wow, Casey, amazing.
Yeah, I just had my
Oh,
29th anniversary.
oh,
So,
congratulations. That's huge. So just dive in wherever you'd like to. I know there's a few things we want to talk about specifically, but tell us a little bit more about you. Round out the story for us.
yes, well, I was abandoned as a 6-month-old infant. My
Oh,
brother is almost exactly a year older than me. So, when he was 18 months old and I was 6 months old, my mom decided that she wanted to be a professional singer more than anything in the world. So, we were both born here in Southern California. I was born in Orange and he was born in Anaheim. And he and my mom were not getting along. She was only 18 when she had my brother, and 19 when she had me. So she
okay.
was very, very young. But she had very addictive chemistry as well. She wanted to be rich and famous. That was her lifelong dreams. So
Mm.
she took her precious babies on a plane and dumped us off in Kansas City. That's part of the reason of my nickname, Casey Sunshine.
Ah.
So here I was, this little California girl that got dropped off there with family foster care, and the first place she dropped us was with her parents, whom she knew to be horribly abusive.
Oh.
So her family, they were religious fanatics, but her brother was raped in the basement of their church repeatedly, and then he began perpetrating that on my brother-in-law, on my brother and I, when we
Mm.
were like 3 and 4 years old.
Mm.
So when my grandmother caught us in the basement where he was the uncle, and my brother and I were 3 and 4 years old, caught us in the basement he was doing the you show me yours, I'll show you mine, and we got in trouble, but more specifically, I got in trouble. I was the one that had to stand in the corner. I was just this little girl just doing what I was told,
Oh.
and but I came to the conclusion many years later that my grandmother, she had a sickness about her, obviously. I call her my evil grandma, my mom's mom, because I had a really wonderful grandmother on my other side of the family, my dad's mom, who was my angel. And she was really the one that kept me focused on Christ and kept me understanding that God was good and that these people were making bad choices. But
I
yeah,
can imagine that if you're in a home where they're so very religious, but doing these things that you could want to turn away from the Lord and not want to have anything to do with religion at all.
yeah, and that's really what happened with my brother. But you said a little bit about our story. So
Mhm.
basically, we were dropped off for family foster care. But my mom was always in. She was always fighting with her parents. They were very abusive to her. They told her that if she was wearing lipstick and a skirt, that she was going to go out there and do the devil's work. And so she was really big on trying to scare you into believing in Satan, which I grew up not believing in Satan and did not. I kind of saw this. Sneak up of the satanic Hollywood kind of snuck up on me and definitely snuck up on my brother because it's kind of amazing when you think about what we went through in childhood that we became Christians at all.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
So we were tossed. So by the end, I was by the time I was a junior in high school, I had gone to 18 different schools. That's how
Oh
much
my.
I was moved around. So I was moved from family to family to family because my brother was hyperactive, and I had the good girl syndrome. So I was like the quiet one that just sat in the corner and said, "What do you want me to do? I'll do anything. Just don't,
Yeah,
don't
just
let
keep
anything
me,
bad
just love
happen."
me. Yeah, just want me. Yeah.
Yeah, and unfortunately, the only person that showed me any affection was my uncle who was molesting us. So my whole
Mm.
concept of love and affection was very warped through my childhood. So we went to family member, and mostly because they were unhappy with the fact that my brother was so hyper, they would ship us off to another family member. And my mom was off in Hollywood pursuing her rich and fame, and she ended up working for the Kansas City Mafia, and that's essentially what took her to California because she was from that region. And my dad and her went. They got married really young and moved to California to get rich and famous. And she was a mafia. She worked for the Kansas City Mafia.
Wow.
So, and I found out many years later that if you want the good gigs, if you don't want to be starving and living on somebody's couch as an entertainer or performer, that you pretty much need to be a part of a circuit like the Mafia. And so she worked at very nice gigs all over the country. So when we were not in school, we would take a bus or a plane or somewhere, and we would end up with her, but she was
Mm.
usually drinking heavily. Her favorite thing to drink was Jack and Coke, so she used to say she was kind of a wide awake drunk. Very abusive person. Many years later, I nicknamed her Mommy Dearest because she was addicted to Valium, and
Mm.
so she would drink, and usually the gigs would go till 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and my brother and I would be in these hotels and sometimes at the Moose Lodge with all these rich and famous people. So, not surprisingly, we pretty much had no parental supervision. While she's on stage, we're running around, and there's all these rich and famous people. So, I ended up being fondled by the rich and famous while I was in Hollywood or traveling with her across the country.
Mm.
And then I'd go home to different family members that knew that we were two kids that were unwanted.
Mm.
My brother was, a handful. And so it was almost like they started trafficking me at that point because they were like, okay, if you'll take Emery, he's the hyper kid, then we'll give you the good little girl and she'll never give you any lip and she'll do your
Wow.
laundry or clean your house or whatever. So
Wow.
that's how I learned to function, was just to get along, to go along and just try to be perfect. So I became like this straight A student, and if I got a B, I'd have a nervous breakdown and go beg
Right.
the teacher for extra credit. So this good girl syndrome really creeped up on me. But
Wow.
that is exactly that's what they're looking for in the mafia, which is what I found out because when I was in the fourth grade, my mom decided that, she could see that my brother and I were really struggling, back in Kansas City. And so she was going to try to do the right thing, move back to Kansas City. She met this rich guy who he was an engineer for General Motors, and they got married. And so we moved to North Kansas City where the Italian mafia lived.
Oh, good.
Yeah,
Oh
so she
boy.
was yeah, so she was going to work for Cascone. So, if you're not traveling across the country, She
Mm.
was a regular at this place, a really nice Italian restaurant called Casconi's. And
Okay.
her boss was named Johnny Green. We never knew his real name at that point until I found uh, I was doing a paper route at the age of 12. And if you've ever done a paper route, then you know that you have to get up in the middle of the night and wrap up the
Yeah.
newspaper, either put it in plastic or rubber band, and get it delivered by 6 a.m. And
Right.
my route was Little Italy.
Oh,
So I would go up the hill and deliver the newspapers in the middle of the night, usually by myself or with this really a nice old gentleman who drove a little station wagon. And my mom never really assisted in that. But one night she said, "I'm taking you on your paper route tonight." Well, so while I was delivering the newspaper at 2 o'clock and 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, they found Johnny Amaro, who was a with the Kansas City Mafia, the Sevilla family. He was the manager of Cascone, so he was my mom's boss. And they found his body in the trunk of his car and his head in his mailbox. So it took me many, many years with the help of a therapist who basically said, you know, you were being tested to see if you could keep a secret, because my mom told me that the newspapers would all say that Johnny Green, or otherwise known as Johnny Amaro, had been killed in his garage. And somebody snuck up on him, mafia hit, whatever. But nobody ever mentioned that he was decapitated and that his head was shoved into this mailbox. And I was there on the scene to witness this. So
so
my
you
mother,
saw this? Oh,
yes,
oh,
at the
wow.
age of 12, I mean, it's burned into my brain.
Oh my
There was
goodness.
snow on the ground, and there was this big car that looked like,
Hmm.
um, I don't know, it was a Cadillac or what. It was just one of those big boats.
Right, like an Impala or something. Yeah.
Yes, something like that. A really nice car. And I remember because they couldn't fit the head fully into the mailbox because
Oh
it
my
was too big.
goodness.
So I was really traumatized. So my mother told me, she's like, you are never to speak of this, not even to your brother.
So
So
she
that,
knew, and that's why she went with you. She knew that you were going to come on this scene, like they told her.
yes, she never ever went with me. So she was a sleepaholic. If she didn't have a gig, she was sleeping all day, every day. She was almost impossible to wake up because she'd get like
Mm.
two or three or more prescriptions of Valium because she popped that stuff like candy.
Yeah.
So she would sleep like a dead person, and very lazy and very motivated. The only time she'd get up out of bed is for a gig, and so she'd get out of bed like 4 o'clock in the afternoon and do all the heavy makeup and the big eyeliner out to
Right.
there, almost like Tammy Faye Baker type
Yeah, yeah. I just
wig,
saw
you name
pictures
it.
of her today, actually. That's funny that you said that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, so that was the first time in my life when I became a mafia goddaughter, because my boyfriend was the mafia's son, Dean Mantia, and
Mm.
their names are different. The family members do not take their the mafia's last names, and I found out many many years later because they put their restaurants in their wife and their children's names.
Gotcha.
So when I was 21 and I finally left Kansas City, I had to get Butch Sevilla's permission, otherwise known as Carmen Sevilla, to leave because I had been essentially betrothed to his son. So he was my boyfriend in fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh grade. And during the period of time while my mom was married to that man and we lived in North Kansas City, I was protected by the mafia. It was the only time in my life when I was not being molested or raped.
Wow.
So
Wow.
I loved my mafia family. They were
Right. And they
golden to me.
protected
They
you.
never
Sure.
did anything bad to me ever. And then my mother moved away. I got my own apartment at 15. My brother moved in with me for a while, and then he ended up finding a family to live with. So I got it. He and I both went to Youth for Christ camp
Oh,
in
okay.
Kansas City, and we gave our life to Christ on
Mm.
July 17th, 1979.
Aw,
And
that's
he became a evangelical speaker. So he was doing speaking engagements to bring people to Christ. And he and I
wow.
both we loved Randy Stonehill and I think it was Larry Norman and Randy Stonehill. They were the Christian rockers.
Oh, okay.
So we brought the Christian rock to our lunch at Shawnee Mission East High School, and we petitioned them. We brought our Bibles to school every day, and we petitioned them to have Christian rock be lunch on Wednesdays. And
Right.
so, it was kind of the thing that saved our sanity from our lives,
Mhm.
because
Yeah.
that year, the year that I gave my life to Christ, the main reason that I was so motivated to give my life to Christ was because my uncle got out of the Marine Corps. He came back to visit us, got us drunk on cold duck, and we drank it and passed out in our beds. And that night I was violently sodomized by my uncle. And all of my life while he was molesting me, he was just performing oral sex on me, and he was never doing anything that violent to me. Of course, I was traumatized by being molested, but I had my coping mechanisms where I was like, he told me, if you ever tell anybody, then I'll tell your mom what you
What
did.
you did, yeah.
So I believe that I did something or that I should have been able to stop it.
Right.
And then when I drank the cold duck and got violently raped, face down with my face shoved in my pillow, I was asphyxiated, struggling to breathe, and I developed an extreme of claustrophobia from
Sure.
that whole event. And then later that same year, my mom was dating this wealthy man who owned a pornography company.
Ah,
And his son, I was still 14, and his son was 19, and so I had a crush on him, but I had no intentions of having sex with him, and so he raped me vaginally that same year. So when I went to Youth for Christ camp that July in 1979, I went to ask God to forgive me
ugh,
for being raped because my grandmother, my evil grandmother, had told me throughout my childhood
right.
that men would not be able to resist me
And it's your
and
fault.
that it was
Yeah.
my fault. Right. And
Wow.
so, yeah. So,
S- So, it, how prevalent is this?
yeah. So, well, I didn't think it was prevalent because I was basically completely alone. So every time I would go over to this family member, so at one point I was living with an aunt and her husband and my cousin, and they kind of like, they knew that I had been traumatized and things like that, but they didn't know to what extent. But I was an unwanted child. So I had like
Right.
this unwanted child syndrome too.
Sure.
So, they had me scraping wallpaper off the wall, and they told me that my mother wasn't there because she didn't love me. So there was a lot of emotional
Oh,
abuse, a lot of psychological
sure.
abuse. But I gave my life to Christ at 14. I got my own apartment at 15, and then I got into therapy at 17. And I still remember the first book I read from my therapist. She recommended Toxic Parents by Susan Forward,
Wow.
and then Codependent No More by
Yep.
Melody
I
Beattie.
love her. I've read all her books.
So that was when I was 17, and I'm 58 now. So 41 years ago,
Wow.
I started on this path. And I knew that I had, all of this trauma that I had to deal with. I was at that point living on my own. I was working 3 jobs, and I got a short in my taillight system of my car. I had a 64 Riviera that I paid $210 for, and it had a short in the taillight, and they wanted $600 to repair it. And I had three jobs to keep that apartment, so I was not able to come up with the $600 to fix the short in the taillight. So I got 3 tickets, and I got pulled over. And when the Lenexa, Kansas police officer realized that I was alone in the state with no guardians, raising myself, I forged documents to get myself back into school when I was 15. I forged my mom's signature. He figured he had a fresh one. And he took me into the basement of the police department and strip searched me illegally. But he let me
Mm.
go on my own recognizance because he saw that I had these tickets out there that I had not paid, had not been able to pay. And so he said I had these bench warrants. And so he took me to the basement of the Lenexa, Kansas Police Department, had me take off all my clothes and strip searched me and made me bend over, put a flashlight, body cavity search, all that stuff. So I had this roommate when I was 17, and I went home. I had to walk back to my car that was sitting on the side of the freeway. Got in my car, got home, told my roommate what happened, and the next day, she went into the police department and told my story, only she said that it happened to her, and found out that this police officer was regularly pulling over these young women that were frequenting
Mm.
a restaurant called Pogo's there at 75th Street on I-35. So this guy was a predator, and he worked
Right.
for the police department.
Wait, wow.
So she got him fired, but really, so here I was just having all of this, having been molested by 5 different males before the age of 11, and then raped twice at 14. To me, this was just par
Life.
for the course.
Yeah.
You know, people will ask me like, "Why aren't you all traumatized?" And I'm like, "Well, I went through 12 years of therapy for one, and for two, I've been talking about this for 41 years." And so what
Right.
I found is that it's very prevalent. The statistics are supposedly that 1 in 4 girls are molested by the age of 4, but we know it to
It's
be
more than that.
more like 1 in 3. And they said 1 in 5 boys, but it's closer to 1 in 4 boys.
Mm.
So over my 29 years, I've been counseling a lot of young men and a lot of people, especially for porn addiction.
Yeah.
And a lot of people do not realize that, like in Middle Eastern countries, they rape those boys as a rite of passage when they come into their puberty. This is
Wow.
like they're going to toughen them up. And much like the thinking patterns of people in the Middle East, I was pretty much trained that way. You know, that's the whole reason that these women wear the all of the headgear and so forth is because they're supposed to cover their hair and their face because men can't resist them. And I was
Ugh.
raised with that belief system, so I always thought that it was my fault that, you know, and many people that I have counseled over this 29 years, that this is what women do in particular. They have a habit of chopping off their hair, gaining weight,
Right.
and making themselves unattractive
Right.
to the opposite sex, particularly if they've been raped by men or molested by men. And so, considering the fact that I got all of that therapy, it was rather miraculous that I was able to maintain my femininity, not
Yes.
give up myself, and focus on my spiritual strengths. And I was going to a wonderful church there in Kansas City. It was called Full Faith Church of Love. It was non-denominational church, and so I'd gone through many years singing on stage with my mother my signature song. And I remember being 8 years old or thereabouts and singing I Don't Know How to Love Him. That was my song. So it's like every time we would
Mm.
perform, our family song was Proud Mary, and we always finished the gig with Proud Mary with my brother and I singing, Tina Turner style. But my
Wow.
song was from Jesus Christ Superstar, I Don't Know How to Love Him. And of course, I had no
It's
idea when
messed
I was
up.
a little girl
Right.
that I'm talking about all the men I've had before,
Right.
trying to figure out how to seduce Jesus.
Jesus. Yeah. Oh, that's sick.
That was
Sickening.
the Hollywood thing, and the crowds would just go crazy. And so I would sing this song, and then I'd get off the stage, and then I'd go sit amongst all these rich people, and I was required to go entertain them, go be nice to those people, and that's where Dean Martin at the Muscular Dystrophy Telethon. And this gentleman that interviewed me actually found some footage of Dean Martin with
I
Frank
saw that.
Sinatra and Jerry Lewis.
I saw that.
It
And he looks
shocked me.
drunk. He's so drunk.
He was always drunk.
Yeah.
The man was always drunk. So of course we met a lot of rich and famous people, and I mentioned even in that interview, hanging out with Evil Knievel,
Right.
and not Batman, but his sidekick Robin, and a
Yeah.
lot of rich and famous people. But I used to see them and know that they were heavy drinkers, and they never impressed me. And
Right.
but then they were part of my mother, and my mother didn't impress me. I mean,
Right.
I loved her, but I always saw that she was not a healthy person. Like everyone
Yeah.
in my family
Right.
knew that my mom was not a healthy person.
Wow.
Even though
And
every time she'd come to town, they'd roll out the red carpet because she was pseudo famous. So,
right. Because she's
it was
famous.
just
Yeah.
a lot of contradictions in there. So,
Yeah, for sure. So because you were in the whole Hollywood scene, again, this was just your life. You didn't really think anything else of it. But back to the idea of how, the prevalence of something like this. I mean, obviously there's only a percentage of people that are in the Hollywood scene, but talking about, even outside of the Hollywood scene. So like you had the police department issue and you've had other experiences outside of that, like the whole foster care system, the whole, being passed around even just among your family. I mean, what do you think as far as other people at large, the population at large? Is this just a one-off or, what do you think?
well, studies indicate that if you have a house, let's say there's a housing development of 250 houses, there's approximately 14 houses within that housing development where children are being regularly molested and raped. So I had just heard
Mm.
that recently. I thought that was just, that doesn't surprise me at all. I was actually surprised that it was only 14.
Right.
So,
Mm.
so I was like among my cousins, I got to spend a lot of time with extended family. You know, my second, third, fourth, fifth cousins
Right.
were around quite a bit, but we were not really. You know, we were the problem children. They were. It was always like, what do we do with these two kids? Because nobody wanted
Goodness.
us there. It was my mom wasn't, even though she was making all this money working for the mafia and working in these nightclubs, she never sent any of that money back. So
Mm.
these people that were taking care of us. So we'd get farmed out to extended family members that were on welfare because they would get a check from the government
Oh, wow.
for us staying with them. So we'd end up, they were extended family members, but dirty old men. And even my saint grandmother, the one who really kept me on the path to God, she was married to my step grandfather, and he was fondling all the girls in the family. And at what
Wow.
point, yeah, at one point, I guess my mother outed him because he grabbed her and tried to force a kiss on her, and so she was in town and she exposed what my step grandfather was doing on my dad's side of the family, and then all the girls in the family came forward and said he's been stealing our underwear and doing this. So I had all these cousins that lived there with us, and we had anywhere from 6 to 13 kids that stayed there with my grandmother. She was raised in an orphanage, and her mo was to never have a child be left who
Mm.
would have to end up in an orphanage.
Right.
And so she would take care of all of us, but her husband was a predator.
Wow. Goodness. It was
So
just everywhere in your family. That's
it was
terrible.
everywhere. And the
Wow.
sad thing is, like, I was telling someone that recently, and they literally said that they think I have extra reptilian blood. So now I've been called damaged goods.
Oh,
I've been called, the unwanted
that's
child.
terrible.
And now I have the added stigma of, oh, you have all those reptilians in your
That's
bloodline.
so dumb. No, you know what? You're a blood-bought child of God, creation of the Most High. You are like his favorite, his favorite. And yeah, they can pound sand. I don't know. That's
Isn't that
ridiculous.
horrible? It's
That's
really
horrible.
like I'm trying to be open-minded and for people that are talking about this secret space program in Area 51 and really talking about government corruption, because I mean, what have I been doing for the last 29 years
Hmm.
is looking at it straight in the eye. We've got
Right.
an open border. I'm here in Newport Beach, California. I am 90 minutes from San Diego, Tijuana.
Wow.
And I've got these women in my neighborhood from Panama. I was in a court today helping a woman get a restraining order against her own husband because she came here to marry a rich American. She found one, and he's horribly abusive. So, so most of what I do, some people get the wrong idea, like I house them. No, I don't. I
Mm.
provide emotional support. So I'm always on the phone.
Wow.
I have a phone. I should have one surgically attached to my head.
And you do this for free?
I do. And you know
Wow.
why? I'm not a licensed therapist.
Right.
And when I was going through it, I had nobody to talk to.
Right. Right. Right.
And so the one thing I wanted to do is I wanted to be a person that they could say, "Hey, she never charges," and even people will say, "Oh, I owe you dinner, or I owe you a beer, or any."
Whatever.
I'm
Yeah.
like, "No,
You
I
don't. That's the
never."
point.
The whole reason for providing complete and total free care and support is so that no one ever thinks that they owe me,
Right.
and no one ever says, "Oh, I'm, practicing without a license or
Right.
something
Right.
like that." Because they will. They'll come after you
Oh,
very
sure.
quickly. So it's 100% free. And when I was in Orlando, Florida, that's where I raised my 5 sons.
Mm.
Um, that my ex-husband's therapist, she actually would send people to me that were calling her office from a suicide hotline
Oh, wow.
because she could not provide free counseling. So
Sure.
she'd say, "Hey, I know this girl, she's been in recovery forever and she will talk to anyone for free." And I had an office, so I've been in business. I do federal pension law for 26 years in cooperation and partnership with family law attorneys. And so I had this office where people could come. So we started out doing it like every Tuesday, and then we started doing it Tuesdays and Thursdays, and then we opened it up several times a week to do conference calls. So
Wow.
people could just call in anonymously and just talk about their trauma.
Right.
especially incest survivors, because you get so, like
Mm.
this woman who says, I mean, she's basically saying I'm devil spawn, like my family is reptilian or something, and I'm like, oh great, that's so nice. Not, but so a lot of people who have suffered through incest has to be the most embarrassing of all,
Sure.
because I got married at 18 simply because I had a roommate crisis. I
Oh,
literally married my boyfriend
right.
because I was raised in religiosity, and my grandmother, who watched the 700 Club, the same one that perpetrated all this abuse upon me, she was like, you can't have premarital sex. So I married at 18 a severe alcoholic. So at that point, I hadn't had enough therapy to be sure.
Right, right. Sure.
So
Not yet.
I married an abusive alcoholic at 18. But he, that marriage, I finally got out of that marriage. I married again at 29, and he was also an alcoholic, but he's also a person who experienced sexual dysfunction in his family.
Mhm. Mhm.
So I literally mark my support, my free support to survivors, with the time period where I was engaged to my second husband, because he became essentially my first survivor.
Oh, wow.
Because
Right.
as a man, he grew up in sexual dysfunction. His parents were swingers in Palm Beach
Mm.
County, Florida,
Mhm.
and that might ring some bells, ding, 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 for somebody as far as the neighborhoods, Epstein's, that sort of thing.
Wow.
So he had a very similar experience, but his parents were swingers, and he was exposed to a lot of pornography and things like that. And so within a year of he and I marrying, he got into recovery. And but I was kind of his support system, and I was the first person he could ever talk to
Wow.
about his childhood trauma and sexual dysfunction. And so we ended up starting a business together. We had this office. So while he's going to his AA meetings, I was doing my codependent anonymous Al-Anon adult children of alcoholics meetings, and that's what
Wow.
I've been doing for 29 years.
Wow, wow, that is a beautiful story. I mean, it's a terrible story, but it's a beautiful ending that you are helping so many. I wanted to share this with you, anecdotally. I haven't gone through anything like that, but I remember going through something and then the Lord telling me the thing that you went through, the devil has to repay 7 times. Like, whatever he's stolen from you, he's gotta repay 7 times. It's in the word. And I had heard that sermon when I was like 12, 13, 14, and it stuck to me. But now I'm like close to 50, and the Lord brings that back to my memory. And he says, "Remember that sermon?" I said, "Yes, sir." And he said, "It's going to be all the things that were stolen from you are going to be returned to you in souls, in people receiving the healing that that you received through your trauma." And so instead of just one, you going through the trauma and all the pain, and just one being healed, the devil's got to repay in souls. And that's what you're doing, is you are taking the healing that's been given to you, and through you partnering with the Lord, you are restoring so many. So where the devil wanted to take your life, instead what he's getting back is you and the Lord are partnering to bring many out of that trauma. That's beautiful.
That's beautiful that you say that, because I had not heard that. But when people keep asking me, like, why do you do this? And I'm like, well, the Lord blessed me with the ability to be able to. I mean, I've done pension work since when I was 17, I got my first pension job. So right there, I have stayed in the pension industry. So then I worked as a pension administrator and the secretary, and then I worked as a bank trust officer with pensions, and then I became insurance licensed, and I became an actuary and a stockbroker. Now, the reason I mention this is because I was so, lacking the protection of a family that maybe could put me through college or that sort of
Mm,
thing. So to be able to find a niche type of work that I could do, I had I had the brains to do it, and
right.
the actuarial brain. I'm really good with math and all that kind of stuff. So that's where the good girl syndrome paid off. The Lord gave me that, to the
Mm,
point where I could support my 5 sons that I raised. I raised them in one house in Orlando, Florida. They got to go to one school their entire lives. Their dad
mhm,
was he had addiction issues with alcohol, but he was in recovery, and he loved God as well. And so my kids got to see to people in recovery. They
Wow.
got to see that this does happen in the world, but they had a one safe home where, we had our disagreements, of course, but it never there was no violence or any of that. And so we were able to raise them in love together in one household
Wow.
and in one house for 17 years. And so I've always been on the flip side where, I do this because when people come to me and they say, "KC, I'm going to tell you something," and I've never told another human being. That is such a blessing to me, to be a person that is safe enough when I tell my story and people say, "Oh, that's horrible," but then it motivates them.
Sure. Yeah.
And they go, okay, if she can say this, if she can talk
Mhm.
about these horrible things that happened to her, and the fact that people think she's damaged goods or now reptilian demon spawn, that if she can do it, I can do it. And when
I
someone
love
says
that.
that to me, I've lost count of the people who've told me that I've saved their life emotionally and spiritually, and also led them to Christ many, many
Mm.
times
I love that.
through the love of Christ, not through religiosity. Because
Right.
that's one of the things that my brother and I agree on. He has an award winning atheist podcast, and the one thing that he and I agreed on is that religion is corrupt.
Mhm.
Religion, corrupt people, they hide inside religion. They have
Yes.
infiltrated the Jews and the Catholics and the Christians at the
Absolutely.
highest levels, and predators. And so many people
100%.
tell me, "Oh, I send my kids to church camp," and I'm like, "You have no idea how many predators are hanging out in the church. This is where
Right.
they go to prey on children." And so I bring that message, but instead of I know that the Lord is bringing souls because of the work that I do, and that's what makes me happy. And
Yeah.
so the fact that if I can pay my bills, then I'm going to continue to use all of my free time to help others. But the flip side was the Bible says you have to forgive 7 times
Mhm.
70.
That's true. Yeah.
So when my mom got to about the 490th year of use,
Well,
I finally said, okay, I was 45 years old. I'm 58 now. And I finally said, my mom, she moved to Florida and she wanted to be close to me and my kids. And so I required of her that she attend therapy with my husband's therapist of 9 years. And that therapist met with her for 5 or 6 weeks. And then she sat my husband and I down and she said, "This woman is so toxic. You can't
Mhm.
possibly be with all 5 children at one time, so you must one of you has to be with her at all times if you're going to allow her to be around your family."
Wow.
And she just recently passed away at the age of 77, spent the last 13 years of her life when I finally cut her off and said, "I've had enough of your toxicity and abuse." Um, then she honed in on my adult children. And for the last 13 years, her and my brother, who both are atheists and who they say they don't worship Satan, but then they say "Hail Satan" on their Twitter pages.
Oh boy.
So, how they manipulated my adult children. So, that's been a struggle for the last 13 years, watching my
Mm.
children be told that when I was singing at a megachurch in Orlando, Florida, and we were having a wonderful life, and my kids looked forward to going to church, and they had their friends and their church family,
Right, right.
that I was abusing them by forcing them to go to church.
Wow. Talk about all the abuse you've been through, but that was the abuse? That's where her line was? Okay.
Yes, my mother
So
and brother
mm.
told my kids that making them go to church was child abuse. So imagine
Oh, wow.
you have my childhood, and then I worked. I was literally. I'm a recovering workaholic. I used to
Mhm.
sleep like 4 hours a night, and I lived on caffeine because I had 5 sons.
Sure. Yeah,
I
that's
had a
you're a busy
business to
mom.
run,
That's a very
and I
busy
had a
mom.
husband in recovery. He was trying to work his recovery. At all of those years, he was really struggling with his own recovery, and
Mhm.
so I was kind of like babysitting him too. And
Mhm.
yeah, so I'm a recovering workaholic. So now I have all this spare time in my hands because my kids are all grown. So what
Right.
do? I research the corruption that's running our planet.
Wow. Yeah, you're out here in the patriot space. I've seen you a lot out here, and I keep like, "Man, I've gotta talk with her." And then when we got to be on that podcast together recently, I was like, "Oh, man, I love this lady. I gotta meet her." But I wanted to bring up another topic. not another topic, another thing in the same topic. We just had Sound of Freedom come out, and so there's a lot more mass awareness going on, and hopefully a lot of people waking up. I know that most of the people that listen to my podcast are folks out on Twitter, True Social, Pill, different places that are patriots who are watching. It hasn't really reached into the non-patriot space yet. That's okay. Um, but one of the things that I've really been kind of disturbed about is there's a lot of patriots, who are really working hard against Sound of Freedom because of the hotline phone number that is attached to Sound of Freedom. And I at first was kind of scratching my head because this, for those who don't know this, if you call the hotline for trafficked children, it goes to the Clinton Foundation, which of course seems very nefarious and weird. And why is that the case, and so forth. But I learned today, before speaking with you, Casey, that I believe it's federally mandated that it goes through that number. Am I wrong with that? Am I wrong in that? And what are your thoughts about this topic of this phone number with Sound of Freedom?
Yeah, what I found to be true, which is another reason why I do what I do, and that is that the agencies that are established to help traffic children, at the very top, they cause children to be trafficked. And that includes
Correct.
CPS, that includes the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, that includes, so I'm good friends with Megan Walsh, and her dad, John Walsh,
Hmm.
is been. All you have to do is it's just one visual. You look at her Twitter page, and you're going to see John Walsh giving an award to Hunter Biden. Yeah,
Oh, wow.
for yeah, and as a champion for child trafficking victims. Okay.
What's that emoji? Or like, it's
Okay,
like,
so it's
no.
really, really important for us to understand
Mm.
that the 501c3s and the 501c4s that are established that are supposedly philanthropic, that they are all the money laundering organizations of the cabal. And that includes the organizations, including the Amber Alert. So, Laura Silsby,
Yes.
who was caught trafficking 33 children out of Haiti, they put her in a top position at the Amber Alert. So you cannot trust these organizations.
Wow.
So there are times when people come to me, and the only thing that I have, the only resource I have available is a domestic violence shelter, particularly with women that are in abusive relationships or they're being trafficked on the streets or their children are being trafficked. The one safe place to go is domestic violence shelters, and even those places, in many respects, are not safe. So, what I do is I maintain a lot of contact with these people. I make sure that I'm in contact with them at all times because, yeah, protective agencies, they traffic children. I
Hmm.
myself was trafficked in the 70s and the 80s, and these people who step up to take care of children, they're usually doing it for a welfare check or some other,
Right.
it could just be somebody's thinking that they're a good person or whatever, but I am finding that is where the predators hang out.
Right. Right.
Just
Yeah,
like
for
the
sure.
Disney employees that
Yeah,
work at Disney so they can be close to
for
the
sure.
employees.
Exactly.
So it's
Yes.
really important for us to recognize that I waited for 3 years for Sound of Freedom to come out because, as I was mentioning before we went live, my big issue is like for many, many years, for 29 years now, I've been told by my own family, like, hey, at Christmas and Thanksgiving, we know that you do all that work with rape and molestation survivors, but can you just not mention it? And I'm like, oh, okay, sure, no problem. I don't usually bring it up. But
Right.
family members, they know what I do.
Right. Right.
I used to be all over Facebook, all over social media, putting the word out there. If you know anybody who needs support, I'm here. It's free. And then when I got COVID and said hydroxychloroquine saved my life, I got completely canceled on social media.
Right. Right.
So then I took my PA and went out on the street corner and started singing in Huntington Beach and Newport Beach. And in between songs, I'd say, the government's lying to us about hydroxychloroquine. So we have widespread corruption everywhere. And Sound of
Right.
Freedom, the fact that it made it to the theaters at all, we praise God for it. The
Right.
fact that there are some people that are involved in that come from Hollywood, so they had to pay the piper at some point, meaning that, even Roseanne Barr the other day, somebody asked her, so what percentage of Hollywood is corrupt, and I expected her to say like 80% because I know a lot of good people, but
Sure.
she was really talking about the control mechanisms, and she said 100%.
Wow.
100%. And that was my experience as well because I was there and I was in it. And of course, I'm a good person and I'm a Christian, and so I wasn't perpetrating that on anyone.
Right.
But I was still in a system that was selling Satanism,
Sure.
selling immorality, making opportunities for complete and totally immoral lives,
Right.
orgies, parties, alcohol, you name it. And I was trying to go along to get along because my
Mhm.
brother is a famous comedian in Hollywood and
Mm.
very wildly successful and really wildly talented.
Right.
But at one point, we separated because he literally named his cat Lucifer and joined forces with my mom to say that all religion is corrupt, it's a mental illness, and your mom forcing you to go to church was child abuse. And
Mm.
he's talking to my young adult children and telling them that Satanism is just self satisfaction. Satan wants you to get as many orgasms as you possibly can, have all the women, have all the fun. Your mom's trying to keep you from that.
Oh,
And
wow.
so when it comes to Sound of Freedom, I want to come back to that I celebrate it and I praise God for it every day.
Wow.
Because I am hearing, even from my kids that are not involved in the Patriot movement, they're saying that they're seeing the Sound of Freedom, they're seeing information be talked
Good.
about child trafficking and they're also drawing the correlation to Epstein Island. But I want to make them very aware of the fact that there's Peter Nygaard out there that was raping hundreds and hundreds of women on the in the Bahamas, and
Mm.
that these people that own these islands across the globe, including the Disney cruise lines, delivered
Mm.
children to those islands.
Oh, dear
And
God.
it wasn't just molestation. Jeffrey Epstein had a birthing center on there. So these families, these
Mm.
13 royal bloodlines that run the planet, they're furthering their bloodlines, and they do that through child rape. And
Right.
even the Tavistock Institute documented, and they're a corrupt entity in and of itself, they documented that if you could traumatize, particularly sodomize a child, and inflict that much pain and suffering on them through the act of sodomy and rape, that if you can get it to them sex before 8, before it's too late, you will have a child who has the likelihood of having all of these things that they identified, which are an acute visual acuity, up to 44 times visual acuity, photographic memory, and a couple other things that I can't think of at the moment. But the point being, and we're so hyper vigilant. Like,
Right.
you know, I'm people will say that I'm a workaholic or I'm an overachiever, and that's
Mhm.
because bad things happen if I relax.
Right,
So,
right,
with all
right.
the therapy, all the meditation, all the prayer and meditation that I spend every day in, I still am hypervigilant. I still am claustrophobic. So, they
Right.
did these traumas to me before the age of 8 so that my brain would literally bond it
Mhm.
to my neural pathways so that I
Sure.
would have to identify with those things and suffer from that hypervigilance
Mm.
for a lifetime.
Have you ever done EMDR?
I
Any
don't
EMDR?
what is that?
That where that changes the ruts and the neural pathways in your it's a type of, therapy. It's really cool. We'll talk about it later, but yeah.
I have not. I think we did when we interviewed you. I think we discussed that briefly. It sounds
No, I didn't bring it up then, but no, it's the
really?
first time I've thought yeah, I haven't thought of it in a while, but it's yeah, we'll talk about that's a yeah, it changes the ruts in your brain, and, like, interrupts those ruts.
Yes, yes.
S
Um, yeah. So what I decided to do, and that's why I named my organization Sexual Trauma and Recovery, because the acronym is STAR. So what I do is I
Mm,
help people find the star within them to tap into the superpowers. They put this on us so that they
mhm,
could create agents for them under MK Ultra, and what I went through was probably more sex kitten programming because I was
mm,
trained to sing and dance in a very sexual manner. I
right.
was trained to dance in a figure eight so that my hips were always, you know, doing that and singing songs about how many men I've had before on stage in Las
Mm,
Vegas with
check
Dean
it out.
Martin and Jerry Lewis and Frank Sinatra. Yeah, I just
Like
had kind of this really wild flashback because I was at a restaurant and they had this little boy they had that got up to sing at a karaoke, and the entire restaurant stopped what they were doing to focus on this little boy who was up there with the guts to sing. And I thought, wow, that's why they did it, because it had to have just stopped the whole restaurant when you had
Right.
these kids, particularly a little 8 or 9 year old little girl dressed up like a lady of the evening, singing songs to Jesus and talking about how many men she's had before in a
Mm.
room full of drunk people.
Right.
And then I'm just at a restaurant where they have karaoke and where everybody stopped and everybody clapped, and they were so impressed
Mm.
that a little 6 or 7 year old boy had the guts to get in a microphone. Well, I had a
Sure.
microphone shoved in my face my whole life.
Right,
And
right.
so I thought this was part of this programming. It was part of
Mhm.
this plan, and it was God's plan to save me and rescue me. And I think that my mom, her issues of alcoholism and her habits kind of short circuited their plan, because they were definitely grooming me
Right.
to the recording studios, the talent scouts.
Sure.
I was taken to John Casablanca's modeling agency, and then they tried to traffic me at 18
Sure,
to
yeah.
L'Oreal and Helene Curtis, where I was supposed to entertain these guys for the evening, and I've never been to Indianapolis. I'm like, how am I going to entertain them in Indianapolis and show them around when I've never been there? Oh, you'll figure it out. They didn't have GPS back then, so I had to go get a Thomas guide and go visit hotels, and I spent the day there, and
Right.
so I'm thinking that I'm going to get this great gig with L'Oreal. They wanted me for the mascara, and Helene Curtis wanted to do a hair thing, and so they said, you can't color your hair, you can't cut it, you can't do anything, and you're going to be their L'Oreal and Helene Curtis girl. And so I went out to entertain them in Indianapolis, and these guys got wasted drunk, and it became very clear they were touching me in a way that I knew that they expected
Sure. Yeah.
that they were going to have their way with me. So I found my way to the bathroom. Luckily, I brought my own car, and I ditched. And
Good for
John
you.
Casablanca's modeling agency fired me on the
Good.
spot
Well, alrighty then.
and
Wow.
stole my portfolio. That was
Wow.
worth, even back then, which was
Mm.
40 years ago, was worth $3,000. So imagine what they charge for that now.
Goodness. So I wanna kinda reemphasize with the Sound of Freedom thing. We love Sound of Freedom. We love those guys, that did that movie, that whole thing. The phone number. That phone number that is attached to that show is the only pathway right now for a large movie like that to get people help. They don't have somebody like you in their a bunch of yous in their back pocket to be like, let's tell the entire United States to go talk to KC. There's only one of you, right? So, is this, in your mind, the best um, conclusion, the best strong conclusion for them is to have this phone number? Is there, what do you, is that good? Is that bad? Is it nefarious? Are they evil because they're doing that? Are they trying to traffic children through Sounds of Freedom?
No, but you're gonna find that some people are gonna utilize that. So you're gonna find
Sure.
that, because and we were talking before. You got Gibson, who is he's standing behind us now, but he was in it. He was in the
Right.
club. Okay, that George Carlin, my brother's friend, talked about. There's a big club, and you ain't in it, and they own all the Senate, and the judicial, and
Sure.
everything, and the corporations. So we need to accept that they own the child trafficking organizations and the
Right.
child protective agencies. So
That's right.
you can attack those 800 numbers all day long, but go ahead and find me one that's clean, because there's
Right.
always someone that can be bought. I remember this one gentleman. He was from Mexico, grew up in Mexico, and he knew that Mexico was corrupt. So he's like, when I grow up, I'm going to be a good cop. So when he's a little boy, I'm going to grow up and I'm going to be a good cop. I'm going to be a good cop. So he grew up, he got into police academy, he became a good cop, and sure enough, somebody came along and said, hey, you look the other way, we're going to give you $5,000. And he's like, no, I'm a good cop. And they say, well, fine, we're going to kill your family and we'll give the $5,000 to your partner.
Oh, okay.
So we're dealing with a corrupt
Yeah,
system,
yeah, that makes
Melody.
sense.
There's no way to fix that right now. We're
Right.
hoping that there is some good people in our military that are
Sure.
working to bring down this corrupt structure that we're all functioning in. But it's like people who tell me, oh, you should run for city council. Well, the city council's corrupt. I go to talk to city council Newport Beach. They give me 5 minutes. They sit there literally. You can tell they're bored out of their mind. They're not listening to me. They can't wait till I'm done speaking so they can go back to talking about pickleball because the city council's captured. So the
Right.
city of Newport Beach, where I live, 52 of our most successful businesses are owned by one man who is a refugee from Croatia.
Oh boy.
And
Okay.
despite the fact that he has a class action lawsuit where all of his employees literally are suing him from all 52 businesses, the city of Newport Beach named him Businessman of the Year. So
Okay.
you're talking, so
California's pretty captured.
so
We're all
people
aware.
need to know that these organizations are corrupt, and
Mhm.
that for Sound of Freedom to come out at all, they had to go through some corrupt organizations to make it into these theaters. And you still got AMC like turning off the air
I
conditioner
know,
and
right?
playing games. So we
Well,
have
that
to
got
get.
blamed on patriots as well. They were saying that, Sound of Freedom, like, people would be told that at AMC theaters that they're all sold out, but then they'd be in there and, for another movie or for something else, and, like, the thing is empty, and so they've been accusing Sound of Freedom for buying up their own tickets to keep it empty so nobody would go see it. I'm like, "Oh, why are people shilling on Sound of Freedom like that?" Like, they're trying to make Sound of Freedom look like they're literally nefarious people.
Well, and you know what? There's this saying that they have in Hollywood: there's no such thing as bad press. So, even if they completely, because I've heard, oh, Mel Gibson, he's Illuminati and, blah, 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 and he's doing the Illuminati symbols. And then, same thing with Tim Ballard, like he had some correlation to somebody on somebody's board of directors or whatever. And then the 800 number. The bottom line is that the movie got out.
That's right.
God is winning.
That's
Okay,
right.
so getting the movie out, talking about it. So if they're talking about turning off the air conditioner, yay. If they're talking about they're laundering money through the Sound of Freedom so that they can leave these empty theaters, they're talking about it.
Right.
People are becoming aware. And so, as horrible as that might be, the fact that we might continually be funding these people, one of the things that I learned when I audited the 501c3 and the 501c4s is that only about 4% of that money ever gets to the people in need. The rest of it is laundered
Right.
into Illuminati family pockets.
Yeah, agreed. Yes, I've always wondered about that feed the children thing my whole life. I've been like, I've looked at that kinda sideways, like, "Is it
It
really going to feed the children?"
No, and when I
No.
was when I was in college, I remember working for Mothers Against Drunk Drivers because I was always all I wanted in all throughout my childhood was I want to be a mom and I want to show children the love that a mother should have showed
Sure.
me. But I also knew that you don't want to when you have a dysfunctional childhood, you don't want to just do the opposite because then you could have equal
Right.
types of trauma.
Pendulum swings, yep.
So I knew that I used to call myself a cyborg parent. I was like reading, and I got a lot of help from different therapists. In fact, like the whole time that I was married to the my second husband while he was in recovery, I would check in with his therapist as well, and we would she would help me make sure that our relationship with regard to the children and his therapy and mine was still on par because he
Right.
had addiction issues and I was codependent, so I would always check in
Mhm.
with her to make sure that we were living a healthy life and we were always talking things out and that we didn't have any skeletons that were growing things in the closet.
Right.
Get all the skeletons out, hang them out in the living room, dust them off, talk about them because when people their secrets are toxic. So, and I'm one of those people that I think that Sound of Freedom was not enough. I mean, I'm like, I waited for it for 3 years,
Right.
but now that it's finally here, people are finally talking about it, and they've been silencing me forever. They've been going like, and even like when they let me back on Twitter, I'd go into these Twitter spaces because that's when the pandemic happened, I realized I started doing the deep dive on the fact that our government was lying to us about
Right.
ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine. And so I'm like,
Sure.
what else are they lying about? So then I
Right.
start researching the 501c3s and C4s, and then Oprah Winfrey's school and trafficking children from South Africa and LeBron James' school, and then what
Mhm.
happened in Haiti, and then the so-called earthquake, and then all that money, what, billions of dollars, and they built like 6 houses or something like that. So all of these money laundering operations. So we hope and pray that God is getting ready to deliver us from this evil, but it is widespread. So to pick it apart, and to attack Sound of Freedom is something that you will never catch me doing,
Right.
because even if some of those monies are going into the pocket for them to launder, I did the audit and I know they don't need our money. They have 34 quadrillion. So it's not about money, it's about cash flow. So owning a business, I own an energy efficient lighting company with my ex-husband as well. And
Mhm.
one thing I know is you can have $1 million worth of light fixtures in your warehouse, but if you can't make payroll, you got a cash flow problem and you're going to go bankrupt.
Right.
So that's what we are doing. We're delivering a cash flow crisis to these people. Like when the Bud Light issue came up and the Target issue came up, everybody's going, "Look, Patriots, we managed to destroy that business." I'm like, "No, they short sold that stock." I was a
Sure.
Series 7 stockbroker, and I guarantee you that was all planned. They short sold the stock, and they're probably rebuying it after they crashed the market. Never mind for all the people who work for Anheuser-Busch that are probably working for the bottling companies, or they're delivering this beer. You don't think about those families that you're destroying? Or the Target, when they brought out the Satanism and had everybody not, which I haven't shopped at Target forever because they sell Chinese goods that are promoting us into a communist takeover. But
Mhm.
to just respond and to say, Patriots, let's destroy these industries. What you did is you destroyed America's 401ks that were invested in these industries because they planned that. They short sold that stock and they knew when to roll out the satanic agenda. They knew we'd stop shopping there, and then they could swoop in and they could buy the rest of the common stock up cheap and gain even more control of these big box stores. And who would have thunk that during the pandemic that they'd say, "Oh, this is so deadly, it's going to kill all your family members, and you all have to go to Costco at the same time." We got all these mom and pop businesses. You
Yeah.
can't shop there where you'd naturally be socially distanced. You got to
Mhm.
all come to Costco and press the same little button,
Right.
COVID or not. I mean, what were we thinking? And by the way, oh, you can't go to grandma's funeral and you can't go to grandma and grandpa's for Thanksgiving, but it's okay to take to the streets
And go in a bar and a coffee shop. You could go to
and
a
a
bar and a
bar
coffee shop.
and a coffee shop and a liquor store and take to the streets and spit in a police officer's face
Right.
when they
Yeah,
started
it's
the
a
race
mess.
riots. Like,
Yeah, all that was a mess.
yeah,
It was
I'm just
crazy.
going like,
We could do a
okay,
whole 'nother show on that,
we
but
could do a
yeah,
whole
yeah,
nother
no.
show on
Oh,
that.
no, a
Yeah,
whole
I'd
'nother
like to
night, I
throw it
know.
in there.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Well, thank you so much. So how can everybody get a hold of you? I've got your, website queued up and ready to go. I'll put that up on the screen for everybody. It's sexualtraumaandrecovery.com. Tell us other ways, where we can find you, how, kind of what is your reach out to my audience? How can we help you? Can't hear you.
Can
There
you
you
hear me
are. Yeah,
now? Okay.
yes.
Sexualtraumaandrecovery.com is my website, and I always keep an updated phone number and email address on there where you can reach me.
Perfect.
Just because when they started canceling me on social media, I was in 48 different groups and I
Mm.
was moderating 12 of them, and they took me off of everyone at every single one of those
Oh,
groups,
goodness.
deleted 1,000 of my friends. So the one thing I want to do is always be available. So that's why I have my website that I control, and they still mess with me. Like they have debanked me and things like that. But really, the Lord is taking care of me, and as long as the Lord
Mm.
takes care of me, I'm here to help people. But just share my phone number, share my email address, because what I do is I take the calls. I talk to people until they feel comfortable with their story, and once they feel comfortable, then I put them in a group where we come on a space like this, which I use StreamYard because Twitter, they they're still censoring me. So
Right.
I tried Twitter Spaces, but they kept shutting down my Twitter space. So I
Mm.
was like, oh my gosh, there's no free speech anywhere. So I ended up just doing my own StreamYard.
Sure. Yeah.
So once I have people that are ready, if they're ready to actually have conversations with others, then I put them in there. But up until then, if they just want to talk to me, I will listen until they don't need to talk anymore.
Wow.
And that's something that I'm committed to do. So I've got my business kind of shored up where I can work about four hours a day and make enough money to support myself and make sure that I'm doing the research to help this patriotic, um, what do
Movement.
you say? We're the patriot movement that's trying to bring God back to the forefront of the
Yes.
planet because we've been so wholly attacked. And
Yeah.
when I say holy, I mean like big picture. They've corrupted just every industry. And if you don't realize that, the CIA was established when they brought over the World War II
It's all,
scientists,
yeah,
and then they immediately
all the
set
three-letter agencies.
yeah, and then they set up the CAA, which is the Creative Artist Agency that controls Hollywood. So when you think about, way back when, Marilyn Monroe was probably working for the CIA too. So consider that when
Probably.
you're watching your entertainment, it is
Yeah,
designed to corrupt. And
that's right.
so, just keep that in your thoughts
Yeah.
and prayers. But if you need help for sexual trauma recovery, I don't provide housing but I do go to court with women who need a restraining order because most women don't
Mm,
understand, and men as well. So some men are battered, but a lot of people do not realize that they
mm,
have to be able to, in a very short period of time, tell a judge that they fear for their life. So
mhm,
that's one of the things that I do is I counsel people who need restraining orders, and I will go and sit with them because it's such a terrifying
mm,
endeavor. But
mm.
otherwise, what I do is provide emotional support, and I'm always here. People will call, and if I'm not available, I will call you back very quickly.
Wow, that is amazing. Casey, thank you so much for gracing our show with this information. This is powerful information, guys, and this is the podcast for freedom activists. Let me tell you, I don't know of a greater freedom activist, like than Casey. I mean, all of it is about my why is saving the kids, and obviously hers is even that times a million. So I'm so grateful for you and your testimony. Thank you for sharing it. Thank you for your transparency and for standing on the front lines and taking care of adults, of kids, of whoever it is that you're helping, whoever's reaching out to you, and that you're doing so through the love of Jesus Christ. That's just absolutely precious and beautiful, Casey.
Amen, sister. Thanks
Well,
for having me.
it is my pleasure, and please go out to her website. I'm sure, hopefully, you've got a place there where people can donate and support you as well. You've not mentioned that, but I hope that's possible. And
I don't, but one thing that I am working on is I'm finishing up my book. It's called Heartbroken Happiness.
mm,
And so I will be, at some point, I'll be putting that out there for sale. But right now, I'm just having, the Lord lead me and doing this for free and not fundraising because they're starting to attack people. They call them patriots,
oh yeah, oh I believe me. It's-
which is why
yeah,
I really work on if the Lord can keep me afloat, then I'm going to be here for others. And I do have a team of survivors that other people can talk to too. So we do
good,
have each other.
good. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much. God, can I just pray us out real quick?
Please, yes.
Yeah, God, thank you so much for this time with Casey and God for always being with her. That you never left her, you never forsook her, and you saw you and her future. And I'm just so grateful that we are getting to experience that with her. And I thank you, just as you told me, that you are getting to make the enemy repay multiple times over through what was meant for complete destruction of her life. God was meant for good for her life and for so many others. And so we're just so grateful for your mercy, your beautiful love. You are perfect in every way, and we love you. We thank you for your big heart, your huge heart. And I thank you for all the women and men and children who are still to come across KC's path and that are meant to. And I just pray over them tonight in Jesus' name, God, that anyone that needs an extra dose of courage or that little unction from the Holy Spirit or the little bit of faith, Father, that you're stirring, God, I just pray that you stir them to call KC, stir them to freedom and to find you. And I think that you are at the end of every one of those phone calls. And so we thank you, Father, in Jesus' precious name. Amen. Well, I bless you, sister. It's so good to meet you and to know you. I can't wait to do more. We're still going to talk. I'm still going to talk to you about a bunch of podcasters getting together. Remember how we talked about on the other show? So let's do that.
Looking forward to it. Thank you so much, Melody.
It is my pleasure. Good night, Casey.
Okay.
Wow, you guys, I kind of baffled and amazed and just thanking God for this beautiful woman. So thank you for joining us tonight. We will be back. I think I've got interviews every night this week. So it's going to be a power packed week. And so glad that you're here with us. Stay tuned. We've got some interesting things coming up this week, and we will see you tomorrow night, same time, same bat channel. Love y'all. God bless.